Nobody is talking about Las Vegas right now, and honestly, that might be the most telling thing about where this league's attention is currently pointed. While everyone's been locked in on Dallas, on Cleveland, on the usual franchises that dominate the conversation regardless of what they're actually producing, something quietly significant has been taking shape inside the Raiders facility. 3 days of OTAs down, and the details coming out of that building are more specific, more textured, and more genuinely encouraging than anything I anticipated walking into this spring. And I want to walk through exactly why, because I think this is one of those situations where the NFL world is going to look back in October and realize they slept on something real. Let me start with Fernando Mendoza, because everything else in that organization flows from whether this piece is right or wrong. Andrew Janovich, the offensive coordinator, who has followed Clint Kubiak across 3 straight stops from Derek Carr to Sam Darnold and that Super Bowl run in Seattle, and now out to the desert, sat down recently and said something about Mendoza that I genuinely had to sit with for a minute before it fully registered. He said the rookie is asking questions that you wouldn't expect to hear for another 2 or 3 years. And when I say questions, I don't mean surface level, what's my assignment questions. I mean the deep ones, the structural ones. Why does this play exist? Why is it being called in this down and distance and not that one? What defensive reality is this concept designed to attack? And what opens up underneath when the defense takes away the primary read? I want you to feel the weight of that, because it sounds simple until you actually understand how NFL offenses get installed inside a player's mind. From the outside, a playbook looks like a collection of assignments. Run this route, hit this gap, block this man. And technically, that's what it is on the surface. But underneath every single concept in a professional offense is a layer of reasoning built over years, sometimes entire coaching careers, of trial, failure, recalibration, and competitive refinement. The wide receiver releasing outside on a curl route does it that way because that specific release clears the throwing lane and creates the precise spatial relationship between himself and the quarterback that makes the play structurally sound. An offensive lineman in a wide zone scheme has footwork requirements that aren't stylistic preferences. They're load-bearing walls. Deviate from them, and the entire blocking architecture collapses. None of it is arbitrary. All of it has logic running underneath it like electrical wiring behind a finished wall. And here's the uncomfortable truth about how most players come into this league. They absorb the instructions without ever touching the logic beneath them. They execute because they were told to execute. And in clean, controlled environments with predictable alignments, that's enough to function. But quarterbacks who operate that way, who take the system at face value and never genuinely interrogate it, they hit walls the moment reality stops cooperating with the script, when protection shifts unexpectedly, when the defense shows a look that wasn't in the install package, when the pocket collapses faster than the route tree has time to develop. Those quarterbacks go blank because they only know what the play is. They never learned why it works. And when the what stops working, the why is the only thing left to lean on. Janovich is telling us, and I don't think he's just doing PR here, because coordinators don't typically burn their credibility inflating rookie narratives in May, that Mendoza is building the why from day one, not memorizing a system, interrogating it, not absorbing instructions like a student copying notes, constructing a genuine conceptual understanding of how this offense thinks and breathes. That gap between a quarterback who can execute a game plan and a quarterback who can improvise intelligently when the game plan meets a defense that didn't read the script. That gap is enormous, and apparently Mendoza is already working in that second category before he's taken a single meaningful regular season snap. Now bring Kirk Cousins into this picture, because the environment being built around Mendoza is just as important as Mendoza himself. Michael Penix Jr., who played alongside Cousins in Atlanta, who sat behind him while being developed as that franchise's future, spoke recently about what that experience actually gave him. And what he described wasn't film sessions or technical football education, though that was part of it. What he described was the presence of a human being who had constructed a career, a family, an entire professional identity around daily discipline and consistency. Someone who walked into the building with the same level of seriousness and preparation, regardless of whether the team was winning or whether the headlines were favorable. Someone who pulled younger players through reads and situations and decision-making processes, not as a performance of mentorship, but because that's simply what professionals do every single day. The value of that kind of presence in a quarterback room is something the league consistently underrates. Everyone evaluates the draft pick, the scheme fit, the arm talent, the athleticism, the processing speed. Almost nobody evaluates what the room around the rookie looks like on a Tuesday in late October when the team just absorbed back-to-back losses and the energy inside the facility has gone heavy and uncertain. What does the young quarterback learn about how to carry himself in that moment? What standard does he absorb about what professionalism actually looks like when things aren't working? Cousins isn't in Las Vegas to win the starting job. Everyone in that building understands his role at this stage of the transition. But what he can provide, and what early signals suggest he is actively providing, is the daily standard. The living example of what showing up looks like regardless of circumstance. That's the real asset, not the velocity on his throws, the consistency of his example. Everything Janovich said about Mendoza's curiosity and everything Penix described about Cousins' steadiness point toward the same conclusion. This organization made a deliberate, architecturally intentional decision about how to build the environment around their rookie quarterback. And 3 days into OTAs, that architecture appears to be functioning exactly as designed. That's not nothing. That's actually the hardest part of developing a young quarterback to get right. Now, I know some people are already ready to hand Mendoza the week 1 keys and see what happens. I understand that energy. I feel some version of it myself, but I don't want Fernando Mendoza starting week 1, and I want to explain why clearly, because this isn't about doubting him. It's actually the opposite of doubt. Year 2 quarterbacks are almost universally more effective than their rookie selves, and the reason has almost nothing to do with physical development. It's about processing compression. In year 1, everything is deliberate effort, reading coverage, identifying the front, working through progressions, sensing pressure. All of that happens in conscious sequence, and the NFL moves faster than any sequence can accommodate. By year 2 or 3, if the foundational work has been done correctly, those processes start collapsing into instinct. What required deliberate thought becomes automatic, and you cannot manufacture that compression through film study alone or mental reps in a meeting room. It only comes from accumulated experience under real conditions. The best thing for Mendoza's long-term ceiling is to build the mental architecture properly right now, asking the deep questions, internalizing the system's reasoning, developing the processing speed in a protected environment, and let the instincts catch up before the real pressure arrives. Based on what Janovich is saying, that process is already underway. That's genuinely encouraging. Let me shift to the defensive side now, because there's a conversation around Traden Stokes, the Raiders' second-round pick out of Arizona, that deserves significantly more careful analysis than it's been getting. The surface read on Stokes is that he's a nickel corner. He lined up in the slot at Arizona. He played press coverage in interior alignments, and when people saw him working in the slot during rookie minicamp, the natural assumption was that the team is projecting him into that role at the next level. My honest reaction when I saw those reports was concern. Real concern, not alarm, but the kind of concern that comes from understanding what the slot demands in the modern NFL and then cross-referencing it with what Stokes was actually doing in college. Because the context here matters enormously, and most of the analysis I've seen has been too shallow to catch it. Arizona ran a heavy cover 4 defense. In that system, Stokes' slot alignment was functionally a safety position wearing nickel clothes. He wasn't pressing shifty slot receivers off the line of scrimmage. He wasn't playing tight man-to-man in the compressed space that true nickel coverage demands at the NFL level. He was rotating into deep quarter coverage from an interior position, using the spatial awareness and range that a safety develops. The technique required, the decision-making process, the physical demands on his body, all of it mapped much closer to safety than to what an NFL nickel corner actually has to do on any given Sunday. And in the kind of scheme Robbie Leonard is expected to bring. A blitz-heavy, pressure-generating defense that I think is going to be one of the more uncomfortable units to face in this conference when it's fully installed. The nickel corner has almost no margin for error, because when Jamar Chase flexes inside, when Justin Jefferson lines up in the slot, when one of those hyper-precise route runners who methodically dismantle defenders underneath starts working against you in isolated one-on-one coverage, you either have the specific technique and instincts that position demands, or you don't. And the skill set Stokes was developing in college simply wasn't being built against that challenge. My projection for him has always been safety. The processing from depth, the ball skills, the athleticism in space, all of it points there. What complicates the current picture is Trevon Johnson, who was brought in via trade and through 3 days of OTAs has not been seen on the field. No images, no reports placing him at practice. The most reasonable explanation is an unresolved contract situation, but that absence creates a structural question. If and when Johnson arrives and gets integrated, does that give the staff the flexibility to move Stokes to the position he actually profiles for? Does it change the depth chart in a way that aligns with what his game actually is? Tomorrow is the first day reporters are on the field. Those answers should start materializing. The offensive line picture is also taking shape in ways worth tracking. Spencer Burford has been taking reps at left guard with his hand in the ground, which is about as clear a signal as this process generates. He's in real competition for that starting spot. Caleb Rogers has been moving across multiple interior positions, which tells you the staff values him as a versatile depth piece rather than a positional specialist. J.P. Jones appears to be the starter at right guard. The left guard battle between Burford and Jordan Meredith is the competition I want direct observation on, because that's a legitimately open starting job. Those are the reps that matter when reporters finally have eyes on the field. Now I have to address the ownership situation because I'd be leaving out something important if I skipped it, and I think a lot of people in the Raiders community are feeling something about this that they haven't fully put into words yet. The NFL owners voted unanimously to approve a new wave of investors buying further into this franchise. Egon Durbin pushing past 22%, Michael Meldman approaching 13%, with additional pieces going to Michael Dell, Joseph Barata, Ari Emanuel, and Mark Shapiro. All 32 owners, no friction, clean approval. I have complicated feelings about this, and I'm going to be honest about them because I think honesty is what this moment actually calls for. Al Davis was a complicated human being, stubborn, sometimes genuinely maddening in his decision-making, brilliant in ways the league has still never properly acknowledged, but he loved this franchise the way you love something that's become part of your actual identity. The Raiders weren't a portfolio asset to Al Davis, they were his life. And that kind of love, visceral, personal, sometimes irrational, creates an organizational energy that is almost impossible to replicate through any other means. You could disagree with his decisions, you could question his judgment, but you never questioned whether winning mattered to him beyond any business calculation, because it clearly did at a level that was almost consuming. Mark Davis never really carried that same emotional weight over the organization. I'm not saying that to be cruel to someone who inherited an almost impossible legacy, but the decisions over the years, the stadium transitions, the roster construction cycles, the coaching carousel, a lot of it has felt more like asset management than football passion. And now watching him gradually reduce his stake, bringing in private equity and tech money and entertainment executives, raises a real question about what this franchise becomes when it's no longer held by someone with deep emotional roots in the silver and black, but governed instead by a collection of investors primarily managing a diversified portfolio. That's the uncomfortable version. Here's the fair version. If the capital flowing through this new ownership structure gets directed intelligently into roster construction, coaching quality, and organizational infrastructure, and if the results on the field eventually reflect that investment, then the identity question starts answering itself. Winning creates its own culture. A franchise that wins consistently builds its own mythology, its own passion, its own reason for being. The transition toward Durbin as the eventual primary owner appears to already be in motion. What matters is whether the people who ultimately hold this thing care about football, or whether they care primarily about what football represents on a balance sheet. I genuinely don't know the answer to that yet. Nobody does. What I know is that the football operation itself, right now, in the spring of 2026, is giving me real things to point to. A rookie quarterback who isn't passively absorbing a system, but actively demanding to understand the reasoning beneath every concept before he takes a live snap in a game that counts. A veteran presence in that room who is establishing the daily professional standard that young quarterbacks desperately need around them. A coordinator talking about his player with authentic enthusiasm that doesn't read like a media performance. A defensive scheme that should generate genuine discomfort for opposing offenses once it's fully installed with the right personnel. These are real building blocks. Not promises, not projections. Specific, observable things. Tomorrow, reporters step onto that field for the first time. And that matters more than people are acknowledging, because everything up to this point has been filtered. Through team-controlled content, through secondhand reports, through whatever editorial decisions the organization made about what gets seen and what doesn't. Tomorrow we get direct observation. Real eyes on Mendoza, processing defensive looks in real time. Real eyes on whether the protection structure being built around him has the precision a quarterback-first offense requires. Real eyes on where Stokes is actually deployed when the full roster context gives the coaching staff genuine options. The words coming out of Las Vegas right now are better than I expected. Honestly, better. But I've been watching this league long enough to know that words in May are the cheapest currency in professional football. Every scheme sounds brilliant before pads go on. Every quarterback looks capable when nobody is trying to take his head off. What tests the foundation being laid right now isn't what Janovich says in an interview or what clips get released through team channels. It's what happens when a free rushing edge rusher is coming off the blind side in week 8 with the season hanging in the balance, and a rookie quarterback has to reach into everything he has built since day one and make a throw. That's when the why questions get answered. That's when we find out what was actually being constructed in that facility this spring.